Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to day 6 and session number 14 of the AMBA and BGA Business School Leaders Forum, brought to you by GoToWebinar by LogMeIn. I'm David Woods-Hale, Director of Marketing and Communications at AMBA and BGA, joining from London today. And for this session, I'm delighted to be joined by Siddharth Oberoi, Director of Global Product, Jonathan Perry, Manager of Client Services, and Matthew Evans, Regional Director of Global Markets at Instructure. They're going to talk us through technology as an enabler in management education and a supporter of lifelong learning. And I'll let the panel introduce themselves in a second. But just before we start, if you haven't joined one of these sessions before, we want your experience to be as interactive as possible. So you can ask as many questions and put forward as many comments as you like. Just pop them in the little box in your control panel, and I'll try and get through as many of them as I can towards the end of the session. If we do run out of time, don't worry, because these will be passed on to the speakers who will be able to get in touch with you directly. Please also feel free to share your thoughts and musings on the social channel of your choice using the hashtag BSLF. I'll be in the line throughout the webinar, so if you've got any queries or want to run anything past me, just pop them in the Q&A box and I'll come straight back to you. I'll also pop some useful pieces of information as to how you can make the most of your forum experience throughout the session, as well as some useful links, so just keep an eye out for those. I think I've spoken for long enough, so to take us through the rest of the session, I will now pass over to the panel.
Thanks, David. So we can go to the first slide. Thanks. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I'm Matthew Evans here, Regional Director for Global Markets with Instructure. Instructure is the developers and providers of Canvas Learning Management System. And with me, I have my colleagues Sid and Jonathan. We'll be talking to you a little bit about enabling management education through the use of technology today, and from our perspective of working with lots and lots of business schools and business school leaders in that vein. So oh, that's great, thanks. So we know that consumer behavior is changing and shaping the way that we all expect to interact, consume, and receive content these days. I mean, just look at us here in this web session enabled by technology, when often we'd expect to be doing these sorts of things via face-to-face conferences and in-person events. But clearly the use of technology has a vital role to play in the way that we explore, consume, develop, and share content with one another. That's no different in education as it is in other industries. And kind of I like to kind of think about consumer expectations really in sort of having three kind of key criteria for today, and that's the idea of relevance, choice, and convenience. So we'll explore a little bit of these further, but I think it could be helpful just to kind of look at some examples from other industries besides education, and thinking of how our habits as consumers have changed as technology has played a bigger and bigger role. So when I think about the demise of high street travel agents, for example, or one-click purchasing on Amazon, we all expect now to be able to craft and tailor the experience to our needs. Not necessarily getting the cheapest product on the market, but certainly having greater choice, relevance, and convenience when it comes to the products and services that we buy. So just thinking about how that bears relevance to education and business education in particular, I'll ask my colleagues John and Sid to step in now and explore some of the quick wins around relevance, convenience, and choice, and how we're seeing education institutions adapt their programs and methods to content created to today's consumers. So Sid, I think you were going to talk a little bit about relevance and convenience first.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've really seen inside of this new post-COVID world is this adoption methodology for how we're seeing an uptick in different mechanisms of engagement for institutions globally. When we think about personalized and relevant communication, it's specific to understand there are a myriad of tools that could be deployed by any one specific institution. But what we really like to focus on at Instructure and Canvas is trying to understand the best ways of engagement with our users. There's no real mechanism for that replacement of in-person learning. However, if we're able to provide a variety of tools that amplify the engagement of students inside of the classroom through a remote learning pathway, it kind of changes the overall paradigm for how we're viewing education evolve. John will talk a little bit more about the pedagogical application, but from my perspective, when we look at the relevant mechanisms, we really want to understand that us just using a GoToMeeting or a Zoom link inside of a classroom doesn't necessarily replace the methodologies of learning that were previously adapted to. If we want to look at things like group learning or peer-based learning or self-assessment, those become much more prevalent inside of a conversation where remote learning is taking place. Beyond that, there's this convenience factor and understanding what are the various methodologies that can be deployed that kind of remove some of those barriers that we've seen throughout the globe, right? So from a global product perspective, I begin to think of, if I am a business school student and I am traveling the globe and I jump on an airplane, how do I access some of my MBA content offline? I have a very busy school life. I have a busy travel schedule ahead of me. Well, not in this COVID world, but previously, I may not have access to reliable internet activity throughout my entire journey. So what is a mechanism that we can research and deploy that will optimize for the convenient learning capacities that are needed to really influence the way that students learn and adapt to their overall methodologies of learning from a remote perspective? But then there's a whole load of other things that impact the pedagogical implications that really factor into the choice conversation. So I'm going to pass over to John to speak about those.
Yeah, thanks, Sid. Yeah, I think it's that situation at the moment, isn't it? There is actually, sort of in education, there is already so much choice. You only have to go online and it's very easy to search pretty much for any topic that you want to learn about, and there'll be some form of sort of online learning that you can take place in. So with sort of the services team that I work with at Instructure, the delivery methods is something that's a really, really big conversation between our learning consultants and the sort of the institutions that we're working with. And I think really the reasoning behind that is that sort of situation of trying to offer something that stands out, that is different, because a lot of the choice that we are seeing online is very sort of simple in the delivery, and it's one delivery mode, whereas what we're looking for is that sort of choice now where you can choose a course that really, really gives you that value, and you're still getting the benefits of the institution that you were working with, but with much more convenience around it, like you were saying. So it is a massive conversation really about how, as organizations, do we stand out to the students to really show them that they're getting the value from the education if they choose to take courses with us.
Yeah, and I think an interesting point there, John, is kind of this notion of flexible learning that happens inside of a system, right? So how do I, as a professor, kind of adapt to any sort of learning style that I want to deploy, right? Especially when we're thinking about like a typical MBA professor, they're all across the spectrum, whether they're a guest lecturer or just a renowned professor at their teaching institution. Can you speak a little bit more about how people maybe deploy their practices?
I think it's that sort of situation as well, isn't it? When we talk about things within a business school setting, and we're talking about, an ever-changing world in terms of business, a lot of the learning obviously takes place between the connection, not only between the experts that we have working within these institutions, but also the students that are coming from such a wide and a sort of diverse background, and and a lot of the time from all over the world. So that learning's taking place from the students as well, to get these case studies that we're looking at and the lessons learned within those sort of situations. And so a lot of the sort of pedagogies and things we're seeing in terms of the delivery, it's not just about content, it's about the connections as well. So the idea of things like external mentors that are working with students as well, that are also working in groups and creating those connections. So in the traditional sense where students or participants in the courses are coming together, they create their connections, they continue to connect afterwards. It's a lot of the sort of delivery that we're looking at is how do you create those connections where basically you can't have the face-to-face sessions all the time. And what we're seeing is a lot more of the sort of institutions are going more for that blended approach, either blended within a particular sort of unit or module or topic as they would describe it, or whether or not they're sort of the larger courses, you know, the full MBAs. Some modules are, for example, taught fully online, other modules are taught face-to-face. And we're starting to see that as well outside of business schools and that setting. That's coming as well within sort of other industry, other areas such as, you know, your universities as well, where to prepare students for sort of the future world where they are going to have to work with sort of when they're looking for more convenience and fit their continuing studies around their jobs later on. The universities are already starting to look at that online learning for certain modules for them as well to prepare them for the future.
Great.
Excellent. Yeah, so I think we can move on to the first poll question so we can hear from the audience actually and see if some of these things ring true. So the first question we'd like to get your feedback on is in this rush to kind of quickly provide an online experience, we've seen a big increase in the use of video conferencing virtual classroom tools like Zoom or Teams or GoToMeeting as we're using here in the last 3 months. And is this the case for you in your institution? Just let us know.
Okay, so I've launched the poll. I'm just going to give it a couple of seconds for some more people to fill it in. There's been quite a good voting rate already, so it shouldn't take too long.
Great.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I've closed the poll now. 97% said yes, 3% said no, and nobody wasn't sure.
Great. So that's even higher than I was actually anticipating. But yeah, we've definitely seen a huge increase in schools and education systems looking to very quickly adapt what they do to an audience who are no longer able to be there physically in person. So, and I think what we can go to the next slide now, but what we've noticed is that, you know, we're kind of coming past the first phase of a little bit of initial shock and panic and just trying to kind of scrabble to kind of keep businesses as going as much as we can, or in as most with as least disruption as possible. So now thinking about, okay, so right, we're providing some lectures online, but what do we do next, or how do we ensure kind of we actually adapt and adopt technology to not mirror the experience we have in the classroom, but actually improve upon that. So, and there's been some feedback already from students who've noticed that, you know, just simply sending out a meeting invitation to a webinar and having mass groups of students join that isn't really going to cut it, and particularly for a business school audience where we're expecting much more of an executive or a business class experience for those students. And yeah, I think the quote that sums it up best is from Adriano Udani of the University of Missouri, who said, "We've zoomed out and students have noticed." It made me smile when I saw that, but it's very serious if we believe and understand that the value of networking and interaction with peers and providing adoptions for easy collaboration and peer evaluations, group work and things like that, and being able to actually meet and discuss and talk with an expert in the field and from industry are what is really valuable. When we do that at distance via virtual conferencing tools, actually we're just in fact just watering down that experience. And one of the fears that I think a lot of business schools have is that how can we kind of ensure the same quality and same high expectations are met in an online or a virtual world that kind of we have in the physical space. And I think we just want to think about these that in a different way. So, you know, we don't want to replace in-person time or necessarily. You know, it's really valuable to have time with your professor, with your lecturer, with your peers. You know, that pre-lecture coffee or being able to just ask that question in a personal setting is really valuable. But then what do we do in addition to that to make sure that the experience is further enhanced? So again, from the pedagogical side, I'll probably ask John to comment here a little bit about the difference around synchronous and asynchronous experiences and how technology should be employed and used to enhance what you already do in a classroom experience.
Okay, I think that, you know, it's that word enhance, like you've said there, you know, Matthew, is that's the key thing. It's quite easy to sort of, you know, isolate out and distinguish between sort of face-to-face and online and see them as very different things. Now, the experiences that we've seen in the current situation is this idea, like you said, and with the quote that you've got, that some institutions have said, okay, we can't do face-to-face, let's go completely synchronous and just use online technology. And, you know, in certain other circumstances, you know, I've heard stories of students that have spoken to me where they've been handed folders, have been sent sort of folders of the PowerPoints that would come from slides that they would have had in sort of a face-to-face session where they would have been able to ask questions and go through. So I think the key thing really with this is the understanding that all of these aspects can be delivered. You know, we talk about blended learning, and you know, that's not just about technology. We've always done blended learning, even with face-to-face, with different activities which suit the different you know, learning outcomes that we're aiming to achieve. But I think sometimes when we look at the online learning, it's sometimes we don't think about the asynchronous and the synchronous and how they can interact with each other. So if we're talking about asynchronous, the fact that people are in sort of executive education traveling, they're accessing this at different times, however they still want to have that connection with other people. You know, we're seeing a lot of increased use around things such as discussions and forum boards to be able to create that connection around those sorts of topics. You know, we're seeing things used with, you know, products like we've got like Studio with video content. So things such as soft skills are being demonstrated in video, and you know, somebody can watch that repeatedly when it's convenient to them, but then they're able to have a discussion directly with that video with other participants in their course to see a different perspective and a different opinion on things. So the asynchronous, I personally think, is probably one of the more valuable areas of sort of the online that we often forget about, in the fact that it provides those opportunities. If there's things like concept checks that I need to check on my understanding of knowledge, you know, if I can't meet with you for a few days, or you know, we've not got the face-to-face session, you know, for a few weeks because of the way that the course is structured, how am I going to get that feedback to make sure that I'm actually understanding sort of the content that I'm looking at there? So things like, you know, concept check quizzes with rapid feedback, you know, for asynchronous learning, they're just really valuable for me to feel connected to the course and that I'm getting the feedback on how I'm performing as I go through. And then I think, you know, we're starting to see synchronous education sort of change. It's not necessarily a case of just delivering the session that I would have delivered in a lecture hall or a meeting in exactly the same way. You know, things sort of like open Q&A sessions to allow for that sort of connection with people, and more informal coffee and chats online. You know, those sort of things, you know, we're starting to see those coming into the course design that we're seeing with a lot of the institutions.
Fantastic. And Sid, I just wondered if you could comment briefly about the interactions and engagement mechanisms. You know, when we water down or lose maybe a little bit the human element from meeting face to face, how do we ensure that those connections are maintained and even strengthened when we move to a more online environment?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Matthew. In terms of the environment that's created in a more online or remote capacity, it makes me think of the one of the big value sells or value propositions of an MBA program, right? Is that networking, those relationships that I build over time, but it kind of shifts it flips the script, excuse me, of how those relationships are being made, and how do you create a more cohesive network that kind of encompasses your capabilities and your human interaction as you're alluding to. So by creating a variety of different methodologies where you're sharing your types of learning together and improving the collaboration that happens inside of these courses, it creates a new mechanism of that network, right? Some would argue that you're even forced to collaborate in a more expedited and a more comfortable capacity than you would if you're meeting in a traditional environment at an institution. So I think with the critical value placed inside of creating a network, it's by creating a new network that is facilitated online that will hopefully build those lifelong relationships with individuals that will hopefully put you in touch and expand your community and your organization. We've really worked on creating a set of tools that maximize a linking network that enable you to, once again, interact with your peers, learn from them, but also to provide a new sense of community for your institution, right? So one of our products, Portfolium, enables individuals to have a sense of community at their specific institution while showing a portfolio of their work, right? So if I'm working with my group in terms of garnering or creating a case study, I can look at all the learning artifacts that we've put together in order to create a body of work that is representative of the different skills that I'm deploying inside of a specific project. And that kind of maximizes on that asynchronous learning capacity, right? It's not just a one moment in time understanding of a student's body of work, but it's moreover a development snapshot of what they will learn throughout their ongoing presence at the institution. So I think the combination of having access to a body of work that they take with them once they leave your institution, but also by having a portfolio that resides within an alumni network where all individuals at a specific institution, both past, present, and future, are able to access that information, it really becomes a compelling capability that empowers institutions to latch onto some of those human components where they can not just see and link to a person predicated on their name and their institution, but also look at the body of work that they've conducted, which is more representative of whether or not they might be the right fit for employers in the future. So I think when we're talking about this modification, it's necessary for the networking component to be kind of central to that conversation, as we ensure that we're providing the value to the students over their time, over their 1 or 2 year program.
Yeah, and that's a really good point actually, Sid, is that, you know, particularly around this network and portfolio of content that kind of stays and travels with the individual throughout their career and their learning journey. Obviously, education is a lifelong activity, and learning, and just thinking about without those tools, it's really difficult for for a student to be able to consistently demonstrate the skills and experiences that they have as they move from institution to institution. And we know that the workplace is more fluid than ever now, and with people changing jobs more frequently than ever before. And also with business schools wanting to sort of build a pipeline of potential or alumni and maintain a connection with their graduates, even when they're no longer formally enrolled in a course, you know, having a way to maintain that connection. Technology kind of lends itself really well to scalably being able to do that in a way that otherwise would be quite difficult. So yeah, thinking beyond just I guess the formal delivery of courses and programs, but more broadly about making sure we maintain that connection and the value beyond that enrollment it's really key and something I hadn't really thought about too much before today. So thanks, Sid, for bringing that up. I think what's important is we've obviously shared a lot already about what we think. Again, it's really key for us to make sure this is actually relevant and resonating with you all that are listening in. So we've got a poll question now, so we can hear from you. So the next poll is that in the next 3 years, what percentage of your programs will either be partially or fully online do you expect? And you've got 4 options there. So David, if you can run the poll for us, that's great.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. The poll's launched now, so I can see that lots of people are filling it in. Just leave it up for a couple more seconds.
Great.
Okay, thank you, everyone. The results are in. So 0% said 0 to 10%, 62% said 10 to 40%, 21% said 40 to 60%, and 17% said more than 60%.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah, so kind of a range, but yeah, I guess certainly more than half the audience felt that this was something that they were going to need to spend at least 50% of their time on or more in the next 3 years. And I'm wondering how these I actually wrote these questions kind of off the back of some understanding and some research that we did with Amber through the management and education report and the business school leaders survey that was run last summer. So if we go to the next slide, you can see what some of your peers kind of think as well about that. So we know that kind of adapting and adopting kind of online and blended delivery for programs is becoming more and more of a talking point for business schools. And in fact, in the last year alone, 64% of schools have already kind of pursued a change in adopting or adapting some supporting technology in their programs from the report that we conducted with that Amber conducted that we were commenting on earlier in the year. And also we know that if you look at the stats here, that 84% of schools believe that their schools will grow in capacity in the next 3 years. If we just think about that, it's probably not realistic or sustainable to expect that growth is going to come from building bigger and bigger campuses to accommodate all these extra students. And obviously this research was done before the COVID-19 pandemic and all the things that we know now that we didn't know last summer when this survey was out. I'm just wondering if these numbers would be even higher now, or if these timescales would even be accelerated. So are we thinking of adapting and adopting kind of technology to fit our programs even quicker than we actually thought when this research kind of came out? So there are just some interesting things to maybe think about. But if we expect that this growth is now going to be in the next 5 years is going to be more and more in online and blended offerings, then it could be a good idea for us to just spend a few minutes now talking about kind of capacity and scalability and how we ensure kind of best practice and what are some of the key talking points around those. So again, I'll ask John to maybe go first if he doesn't mind and kind of comment.
So yes, so you know, I think sort of in terms of sort of the stats that we're looking at there, you know, it's very obvious that sort of under the current circumstances, it means that, you know, people have had to work sort of differently. And if that's happening in business, I think that also comes across, obviously, within education as well. And definitely we're also seeing that the idea of capacity, and like you said about the buildings and that situation, that's coming up in the universities that we're working with as well. It's also one of the reasons why I think when I mentioned earlier that some of their modules, they are looking to sort of bringing those online. And I think it's sort of the thing. One of the stats that we showed on the previous slide was that there was this idea that there could be, that and improving quality in terms of those programs as well. And so, a lot of the conversations that we're having are really around sort of applying good pedagogical practice and the things that Sid's been talking about, the connections and the network, how that gets created, but also those conversations and that learning that comes from each other within things such as solving sort of big problems. So applications, in terms of the quality to things such as problem-based learning, and how sort of technology tools can be applied to that to give basically, large courses with large numbers of people. How do you actually work with that sort of number and have the capacity for each and everyone to learn effectively? Well, one of the ideas is to use the technology to bring them into smaller groups that can work consistently together and maybe work on sort of problem-based activities with the ability to look at the peer review. And I think, in terms of the development of this and the changes that we're talking about, one of the big conversations that has often has come to me, and I'll use actually a secondary school example here. Students were working all across the world, and the question we were actually asked was about science. And people might be listening and thinking, well, Jonathan, why are you going down this route when we're talking about business schools? But I think, in all education, we can learn a lot from every sector. There's a lot of similarities as well as differences. But the initial question was, there's a challenge of how do you carry out science teaching to students in different time zones all over the world? And we were looking at how to make sure that the quality of that science teaching was spot on. And actually it was seen as a challenge, but when you actually looked at it from another perspective, it was a huge opportunity. What we realized was that these students were coming from different backgrounds, different environments, different back gardens, with a lot of different situations and a lot of different flora and fauna. And we could look at that sort of as, well, this is an opportunity for them to share learning specifically about where they are with each other. And I think, that can carry over to sort of a business school situation. When we think of these students all over the world, different backgrounds, different experiences from the businesses that we're trying to learn from, getting those students to group together means that they can basically share those stories, and there's that learning going on there. And and I think that's the thing where the technology does give the capacity to do that. We are getting sort of giving, it also gives access to people who normally wouldn't be able to sort of access the courses, obviously, if things such as flights and travel, are financially take them out of the equation there. So, I think that's one of the things, technology really, that we've got these tools, they give us the opportunity to take people from backgrounds that wouldn't normally be able to attend, but it also enables other people to learn from those people as well. And, I think, that's the things that Sid has been, sort of talking about earlier with the connections. And this is what we're trying to achieve when we're working with the customers, linking and trying to align tools and different technological tools with that sort of pedagogical methodology that they're really looking to sort of deliver to their students. I'm hoping that answered your question there, Matthew. I know it says.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Went off on one of my tangents. Yep.
That's okay. No, that was great, and thanks for sharing. Yeah, examples. I think it's John's in a unique position is that he works with a lot of our customers across the education space, and so he kind of sees best practice from a wide variety of different sectors as he shared. So it's also good to bring in those other examples. And Sid, maybe over to you, just thinking about this idea of sustainability and also kind of adapting to a changing world around us. What are some of the kind of takeaways for you or main points to add to this?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. I think I want to quickly go back to those poll results that we chatted about earlier in terms of the percentage of courses that we think are going to be needed to be either partially or fully online, right? Especially when we think about that sustainability component. So we find ourselves in a very unique situation over the past 3 months where we've been under a global circumstance where I believe the statistics that we've been using here at Instructure is over 91% of learning globally was happening in an online capacity over the past 3 months, which is very remarkable, right? So when we think about sustainable delivery, in my mind, this equates to some relevance of disaster preparation. So we know that we were uniquely situated to deliver this type of online education in a fundamentally more engaging way because it's something that's happened over and over and over again in different parts of the world, right? So if we think of just 2020, the beginning of 2020, before March, we think about the Hong Kong protests that were going on where education institutions were shut down for multiple months. Similarly, in the December to January timeframe in Australia, we had the wildfires where those institutions were shut down. And you spread that out across the globe. There will be different natural disasters, there will be different circumstances that prevent institutions from being able to be open and continuously serving their students. So how do you have a proper disaster preparation plan when you have major events like this, right? And in that scenario, I start to think about what are the methodologies that institutions are able to deploy in order to ensure that they're able to continue to engage their students. Their tuition bill doesn't go out the door. Their expectations for future employment do not go out the door. So how do you create this mechanism that ultimately creates differentiation for your students? How do you still equate a new mechanism of providing value, right? And we chatted about the connections and the connections and linking a little bit earlier when we're talking about the adaption of learning. But from my perspective, it's still being able to understand how all these different components fit together, right? So we're looking at this wheel here and kind of understanding how these components are able to fluctuate over time, whether that's making sure that you're getting rid of some of these cost prohibitive mechanisms, as Jonathan alluded to with travel and airfare, but also still understanding how your programs are going to be responsible at the end of the day for still delivering that value. So it really comes back to this notion of how are you able to utilize that technology that affords you the opportunity to kind of develop and differentiate over an extended period of time. So I think personally, from my perspective, over the next 3 to 6 months, we're going to see a lot more innovation happening within the space, within the learning space overall. And literally, as the title of the slide says, it's going to be innovating inside of technology to ensure that individual institutions are able to maximize their differentiation, to maximize their revenue capabilities. How are you all going to be able to be confronted with this evolving ecosystem of education and the different expectations that are placed upon you or placed upon students? I think we're uniquely positioned at Canvas, at Instructure, to help facilitate a lot of those conversations. We'll kind of be that core focal point, right? So that's why we view ourselves as the center of this wheel. But beyond that, it's about being your trusted partners and adapting to some of these different concerns. How do you learn from each other? How do you provide the best level of quality to your students? And you can start to see how all these things kind of flow in and out of one another. So I think from a sheerly educational standpoint, when I put my educator hat on, and from an innovation standpoint, when I put my product manager hat on, I think we have a lot of excitement ahead of us over the next 3 months. So I'm excited to see how we all keep up with this changing world ahead of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, I'm just looking at the time, and I know that we want to get to some questions. So if we just move to the last slide here, and I can just kind of sum up our thoughts, and then we can move to some questions. So essentially, there's many ways that technology and the adapting and utilizing technology within education will become more and more important and play a bigger and bigger role. for us, would just like to say thank you to Amber for giving us the opportunity to share our thoughts and ideas today. It makes a lot of sense for us at Instructure to be partnering with Amber, because already a lot of the membership have adopted and deployed Canvas as their learning management platform to help them with online and blended learning and delivery. For us, it's an opportunity to come together with the community for collaboration, and learn a little bit about, are we doing the right things? Are we on the right track? Are we building the right tools and technology that's useful, valuable for the business school community, and for this changing world that we live in? So it's really valuable to us to have this opportunity to partner with Amber. We value immensely partnership and collaboration in all of our activity, and in fact we run our own community events like CanvasCon and our business school roundtable, where we invite all of our business school community customers and those institutions and organizations that we're working with to join us and help influence our product decisions and roadmap, and share with us key insights. Because at the end of the day, we make the software, but if it's not valuable or in the hands of the users and used in the right way, then we're not going to have the impact that we want in the world. So that's really it from us. We can go to some questions now, David, if there are some.
Jonathan said, Matthew, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. We've had loads of questions come in, so I'm going to crack on with those. But if anyone has any questions, don't be frightened to put them into the question box, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. So the first question we have is, obviously in light of COVID-19, many schools have had to move online quickly. Do you think there'll be a lasting impact in business schools from coronavirus going forward?
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead, Matthew.
You want to take this? I was just going to say, I think there's going to be a lasting impact in all aspects of our lives, and the way that we operate will kind of never be really the same again. We always talk about, when are we going to return to normal, and I don't think we ever will if we know what normal is. So yeah, Sid, if you wanted to add anything to that, please feel free.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Matthew. Yep, I was going to say exactly the same thing. We're all confronted with this new normal. We need to keep up and figure out a new way to approach maximizing our impact on institutions. So I definitely think that there will be more of this in our futures.
Yeah, I guess there's no right or wrong, but those institutions that have the ability to adapt and pivot easily or quickly will find new ways to be successful and operate in whatever the world looks like once we emerge from this crisis. And that's bringing it back to kind of what we're talking about, is we know that the education needs to be kind of multimodal, multifaceted, not just kind of a one-size-fits-all approach, which I think if you've joined this session today, you probably recognize that. So probably preaching to the converted here, but that's really, yeah, what I would take away from that.
Lovely, thank you very much. Someone else has asked, in terms of challenges, what would you sort of say is the biggest challenge associated with business schools moving their programs online?
We probably all can share something about this, so I'll probably we go around in turn. But certainly one of the I guess certainly one of the So my opinion on this is that education, broadly speaking, is it's a traditional industry. It's steeped in history. The business of providing education is is full of tradition, and one of the things that we see is that a change comes or happens quite slowly within education. So unlike other sectors where we see, like I guess retail or banking and finance and so on, where you know, I never visit my bank branch. I don't need to. I do everything on the mobile app. It would be really rare that I would need an appointment with anybody at the bank. I even arrange my mortgage online and all of this sort of stuff. But in education, it's still quite difficult to not have a requirement or a necessity to be there in person. And what we're saying is that actually that's really valuable. But what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to ask our faculty and our departments and our teams to just think about not just one way of delivering something, but thinking about multiple ways that we can package up content so that you can deliver a full-time in-person MBA, but you could also chunk that up into, you know, a 6-week short online program or a 2-day executive course, you know, to cater for those different needs. So just adapting to change always is something that can be a challenge. But since my colleague Jonathan is an expert in change management, I'll probably let him jump in and carry on what I've just started. I've opened a can of worms for you, John.
No,
Maybe you can close it.
I understand exactly what you're saying. I think it's like we said, you know, I've been really lucky to work with a lot of business schools, you know, across Europe, and when you visit them, you look at the quality of face-to-face delivery that you're getting, the level of people that they're working with, and you see how valuable that is. And for somebody to have, you know, the opportunity to set some time aside, go there and really focus on their work, it is a different situation for them working online. And I think, you know, maybe one of the challenges, and maybe the COVID-19 situation is maybe speeding up, you know, the process of the way that I saw the business schools moving, you know, rather than sort of being taught online and then being taught face to face and then having some online content to read and you know, a few activities that way. It's trying to create the connections between those and understanding how all those parts fit together. So in a lot of business schools, what we've seen is the situation where there'll be development teams of e-learners who are specifically working on online content, and another group of people that are delivering face-to-face, with another group of people as program coordinators or faculty administrators. And, you know, and there's a defined process, and that needs to change when we're looking at changing this content and the way that things work. And although things are being delivered online, there is still some time investment by the educators and the people delivering that, if they're going to really create that quality, still, you know, that connection with their students, even though they're online. So I think, you know, it's like any educational organization, there's certain people who are more you know, as you'd call them, the early adopters, you know, whichever terminology you'd want to use, the innovators, the people that are willing to move, you know, and you've got that larger people, a proportion of people who are sat on the fence, and maybe the COVID-19 situation has moved them off the fence into the direction of, yes, we need to use technology, and I need to make sure that it's quality for the students as they've, you know, as they've come on this course. You know, I think, you know, it's the same challenge with any change. Like we say, it takes strong leadership, a clear vision of where we're going to go, and it really is, you know, getting across to people and giving them that really clear reason why some of the content and some of the delivery needs to go into a different method. And maybe the COVID-19 situation has given a real genuine example, a concrete example of what that is. But I think people were already talking about that move before the COVID-19 situation happened, because of you know, like the circumstances we said, not enough space on campus, people being more conscious about their travel, you know, and cost efficiencies and things along those lines. But yeah, I think that's the thing. It's getting, you know, really, the challenge will be highlighting and demonstrating something that stands out from everything else, that gives real value, like the face-to-face that the students were getting when they do go on campus. And it's just really having the examples to demonstrate that to people.
Lovely, thank you very much. We've had a few questions that are sort of touching on the same thing, so if you don't mind, I'm just going to try and combine a few, which is quite threatening for you guys, but it might save a bit of time. So people are asking around issues such as creativity, innovation, networking, collaboration. These are all things that are fundamental to MBA programs, and they're asking if technology would, how that can enhance that as opposed to stifle that experience for students.
Do you want to take this, Sid, or shall I?
Sure, I'll take a first stab. Yeah, so what I was going to say on the previous question, the biggest challenge for institutions is going to be innovation. So I love that we're talking about that here as well. So when we're looking at a paradigm for how technology can kind of maximize innovation, I think it's a multifaceted approach, right? Where you're able to take some of these elements of creativity that students are able to bring to the table with some of the innovation and collaboration that faculty are able to bring to the table to ultimately deliver new experiences for their students that really challenge them and maybe push them outside of their comfort zone. So there are a slew of resources that would enable students to maximize their technological understanding of the information, where they're really able to demonstrate their portfolio of work, right? When we're talking about 21st century skills and the new environment that we all live with, I think it's about making sure that we have more tech literate individuals that are able to maximize the usage of the systems that they're working within, right? Whether it's the framework of a Canvas-like system or any other technological aspect, it's how are you able to innovate and utilize these tools that are provided to you, adapt them, adjust them, and really stand out within that, right? So when I think about students that have stood out inside of a business school paradigm, I think about those individuals that brought something unique to the table. So I think there's going to be a natural level of creativity that students are going to bring that will kind of spring out from the way that they deploy the tools that are provided to them. But on top of that, some of the distinguished faculty that come to your programs, you're going to find nifty and new creative ways to utilize the tools that we provide to them in order to garner more or have new expectations of their students, right? We've had some institutions, some business schools even, but more technical institutions that have made their students the teachers inside of the classroom, right? So a student may create their own curriculum inside of a course. These are the types of new creative outputs that you can have with your students really owning their learning and owning the output of what they want to see inside of their program itself. So just a couple of examples.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to, sorry, I was just going to add to that, you know, creativity and innovation happens when people come together. So technology allows you to remove the barriers to having more people from more backgrounds come together in a space where they can, when we can foster that creativity and innovation. So, you know, if we stick to the traditional model of kind of face-to-face delivery and full-time delivery, that's kind of a luxury that only a few can really participate in. And when we think about education and business schools' place in the world to help solve some of the complex challenges like inequality or poverty, diversity issues, you know, being able to provide access to what you offer to more people will only further enhance your ability to create those spaces where innovation and creativity can flourish, in my view. But John, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I was just actually, you know, I was going to mirror a lot of the things that you said there about, you know, if you're looking at this as you're actually providing a platform, aren't you, really, for collaboration to take place. And I know in the question, collaboration was one of the words that came out there as one of the big ones with innovation and creativity. There's one of the universities we work with in the Netherlands where, you know, one of their modules that students can take, or there's a series of these modules in different areas, but that's students coming from different programs. So and in some cases, physically, they're not in the same campus, the same location. And you think actually the technology allows these students from very different education backgrounds, you know, so some of them working in law, others are working in sort of the graphic design, others in engineering, that they're being given problems to solve where they're working together with a group of people who've never met. And I just think, you know, that opportunity comes with the technology, and I just see within business schools as well, you know, it's a perfect opportunity as well there to actually bring people together to be innovative and creative, because you're giving them a platform to communicate with each other in a way that, you know, you wouldn't have, wasn't really there for them before unless they were actually meeting face to face. And I think, you know, there's a lot of tools, you know, even outside of Canvas, which are allowing that type of work to take place, because it's happening in industry as well.
Thank you. 3 great answers there. I'm going to do another mashup, if that's okay. So somebody's asked about engagement and measuring engagement. So looking at how students are, you know, if they're comfortable within the class, if they're struggling. And someone else has asked a question around the role of faculty. So do they have more or less time to really speak to students to provide that sort of one-on-one classroom teaching? So I suppose if we combine them together and look at, you know, sort of how faculty can really measure the engagement of their classes and then work out how to you know, ascertain students that might be struggling, who might need more extra support. So do you have any advice on those aspects?
Yeah, I saw Sid nodded along, so I'll let him go first.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of nifty tools that are able to maximize views of engagement inside of a classroom. So we have a specific version of analytics inside of the Canvas platform that monitors how engaged a student is within a course, right? So the number of page views they look at, how much they're posting inside of discussion posts, how much time they're spending inside of that specific module, among a myriad of other things that really enable you to monitor their level of success. But beyond the traditional just analytics, they're actionable analytics. So in this role of faculty inside of that paradigm, from that analytics view, you could say, let me message those students who have not accessed a specific resource inside of a course. So I would actually be able to message all the students who have not viewed a specific video or participated in a discussion forum or who haven't submitted an assignment. So it's meaningful intervention that enables you as a faculty member to not waste your time having to like scroll through a grade book or through a number of submissions and identify who I need to message separately, but doing that all at once, right? And we're looking at a lot of additional models that maximize the implementation processes for faculty themselves, right? So seeing what types of engagement are getting the best value inside of a course. Do discussions work better? Do videos work better, among a myriad of other elements? So luckily, there are a lot of great tools that we have built inside of our products, as well as others, that enable you to view student engagement and enable the faculty to intervene in a meaningful way.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. I think we've got time for one more super quick question. I'm going to put this to all 3 of you. What innovations are you most looking forward to within the business education sector over the coming 5 years?
Okay, who wants to go for it? That was a good question.
That was a challenging one. Jonathan?
Yeah. Okay. just to give you 2 more time to think, to come up with a better answer.
I was going to ask a question back. Someone could clarify what the business environment will look like in 5 years, then I'll tell you.
I think that the blended learning approach is something, and it's such a massive question. I think the thing that interests me, and this maybe comes from sort of other sectors as well, is the use of the analytics, the data, and the adaptive learning side of that for individuals. And I think, you know, there's opportunities there in sort of some of the business sector, you know, to support sort of individuals through that, with that journey and their interest that they've got, and to use that data to maybe connect them with other people within certain circumstances in the project. So I'm trying to think how to word it. I think the next step for me, which I'm looking forward to seeing, is that more connection between all of the components that Sid was talking about. I think that's the main sort of next step. of not distinguishing out face-to-face, synchronous, asynchronous completely. I think as we start to see that merging in, I think that's where we'll start seeing the interesting things coming from the teachers. And I think as more sort of academics get involved possibly within that sort of conversations around that, there's going to be sort of better delivery. And I think sort of looking at the data and the analytics in terms of the interactions from the students and the ability to have those insights is going to be able to trigger the next steps and the innovations of whatever they will be. I think there's going to be small steps that take us, which are going to sort of open up sort of the picture a little bit more for us.
I've got something. I hope to see more businesses and industry collaborating with education in the future. I've started to see this across a multitude of different business and technical schools across the globe, where they have different institutions, whether they're Fortune 500 or 100 companies that are working collectively as a recruitment mechanism with business schools or technical schools. But I want to see the flip side of that. I want to see entrepreneurial programs that are emerging from institutions that enable natural innovation exists inside of the institution, right? And I think that's where the innovation really drives home for a lot of these different industries is what are the natural things that will emerge from your institution that will kind of pave the way for the future, where you are providing your students with meaningful problem-based learning that enables them to solve real world problems that Matthew was alluding to earlier, whether that's racial equality, equity to education, or access to healthcare. So I think when we're looking at things from that lens, it really makes education and the intersection of education and business much more exciting for me.
Yeah, and just from me then, I'm looking forward to seeing education be much more of a lifelong experience, and giving students the opportunity to demonstrate what they know and the skills that they've acquired from a whole variety of contexts, in one place. The portability of qualifications, of skills, of knowledge, essentially. So as we move through our lives, we have a much clearer picture of the things that we've achieved that have helped shape our views of the world, but also we can then use that to start to build up a path to understand, where we want to get to as individuals, and institutions and corporations alike can be part of that kind of ecosystem. It sort of talks to your point there, Sid, where that greater collaboration, but having a way that basically making sure that education is portable and transferable, and having technology play a key role in that, for me is very exciting.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. Well, Sid, John, and Matthew, thank you again for an excellent session, and thank you very much to Canvas and Instructure for their support with this event. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for in this particular session, but we've got plenty more sessions to come. And I just want to remind you that you can meet all the representatives from Instructure and our partners and sponsors in our virtual exhibition. And I'd urge everyone to go there to help build your network and find out more about the innovations available in the marketplace and help manage your way through the new normal. Tomorrow we have a full day of conferencing again, so 4 sessions starting at 9:30. The first session is at 9:30 BST, during which a panel of MBA directors will debate the design and digital delivery of MBA programs and the impact and legacy of COVID-19. After that, at 2 p.m. BST, Hannalena Pessanen, Dean of Uvascular School of Business and Economics, will talk about addressing climate change, the role of business schools. And at 2:30, Claudine Blamey, Head of Sustainability and Digital Strategy at Argent and former Director of Sustainability at EasyJet, will outline her thoughts on sustainable development and why it's important for MBAs. And the final session of tomorrow's agenda will be how to create a winning content marketing strategy with the team from Business Because, and that will take place at 3:30 p.m. BST. You can register for these sessions using the link that I've put in the chat box. But just before I go, if you've missed any sessions, we've put all the recordings of those on our website, and you can find them using the link that I've pasted in the chat room. and we'll be making the attendee list for all the sessions available on our website. For security reasons, these are going to have to be password protected, but I've pasted the password for this particular delegate list for this session in the chat box, so you'll be able to find that later this afternoon and access it there. Please remember, we've got 10 sessions to come, and you can see all the remaining sessions and register via our website. So all that remains to be said is thank you once again to John, Sid, and Matthew for an excellent presentation. Thank you once again to Instructure, and I look forward to seeing everyone else, hopefully tomorrow, on another session at the forum. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.